This is anti-war activist Denis Hamidulin. This is what he looks like after 9 days in a mental hospital. In today's Russia, no good reason is needed to put an inconvenient activist in a mental institution. The practice has become increasingly common for dissenting citizens in Russia since the war began. Denis Hamidulin, detained for anti-war slogans on Red Square on April 28, 2024.
Нет войне. Нет войне.
Hamidulin was taken from custody to a psychiatric hospital, where he was injected with psychotropic drugs. Victoria Petrova is an activist sent for forced treatment after being arrested for an anti-war post online.
Two requests. One, not to start a war with Ukraine under any circumstances. And two, to withdraw the Russian military groups assembled near the border of Ukraine and Belarus.
Through her lawyer, the girl reported abuse and torture by the staff of St. Petersburg Psychiatric Hospital No. 3. She was beaten, humiliated, tied to a bed, injected with tranquilizers, after which she could not speak for 2 days. Yakut shaman Alexander Gabyshev is perhaps the most renowned victim of Russia's punitive psychiatry. Gabyshev traveled on foot to Moscow to perform a ritual to exorcise President Vladimir Putin. In response, a court placed the shaman in compulsory treatment. Since 2021, Gabyshev has been institutionalized in psychiatric facilities, which are more akin to prisons than hospitals. And the list goes on. The independent media outlet Agentstvo noted a 5-fold increase in political convictions sent to compulsory psychiatric treatment in 2023 alone. The attorney, Alexei Pryanishnikov, has been fighting for Alexander Gabyshev's freedom for over 3.5 years. Basically, anyone who showed emotion inappropriately in a conversation with police officers, and that's it, you're sent away. And now, especially in the beginning of the year and in the past year, in 2023, they've already gone to work at scale. That is, there is practically not a single month when, well, a couple of people convicted on political charges, especially with this military censorship, would not go to a mental hospital. How do political activists end up in mental hospitals? And why may this become a popular method for the Putin regime to combat dissent? I've been humiliated, insulted, threatened. Since the moment when I went to Red Square, I had to go there 3 times to realize that I can talk openly and say everything I'm thinking about. Activist Denis Hamidulin was detained for anti-war slogans. On April 28, a court arrested him for 14 days under administrative charges on disobeying police and discrediting the Russian army. He was then transferred from a detention center to a mental hospital for 8 days. There, Hamidulin was injected with psychotropic drugs that made it difficult for him to stand, walk, or even hold a pen. And then I decided that I'm going to fight to the end, like I've been fighting all my life. I'm a patriot of my country. I believe in people. I believe in justice. I believe that one day Russia will be free. This is the last video that Denis has published on his YouTube channel. On May 21st, he was released from the special detention center, but the activist has stopped maintaining his social networks, and he hasn't been in contact with journalists. Activist Victoria Petrova was locked up in a St. Petersburg mental hospital in October 2023. In December of that year, a court sent her to compulsory treatment. Here's how her lawyer describes this so-called treatment.
She was restrained to the bed by her hands and feet and injected with medication that left her almost unable to speak or complain for 2 days. While Victoria was tied up, her clothes were thrown over her face, seemingly to make fun of her helplessness.
On May 28th, an appeal was scheduled, but the hearing was postponed to July 19th. Petrova admits she would prefer a prison term, as that would at least have a clear end date. Haloperidol is an antipsychotic medicine which is used to treat various mental disorders, such as schizophrenia and chronic psychosis. It can also be used to control severe behavioral problems in people with mental disorders. In healthy people, it causes muscle lethargy, stiffness, and hand tremors, reduces one's attention span, and, when taken over a long period of time, it can lead to apathy and a depressed mood. In 2021, the shaman from Yakutsk was also subjected to treatment with the neuroleptic haloperidol, which caused severe side effects. Gabyshev even needed to have an ambulance called for him during a court session due to dizziness and limb tremors. According to his lawyer, he is no longer given these harsh drugs. Gabyshev left Yakutsk on his campaign to oust Putin in March 2019. The initiative was picked up by dozens of Russians who joined him along the way. He ended up walking almost 3,000 kilometers. In September of 2019, he became the subject of a criminal investigation for his alleged calls to extremism. In October 2021, a court ordered Gabyshev to undergo compulsory psychiatric treatment. 3 detention centers and 3 mental hospitals in 3.5 years, with no clear indication of treatment. Gabyshev is now in a specialized hospital in the city of Ussurisk. In May, a court refused for the 6th time to transfer him to a more lenient mode of treatment, to a general hospital. Although even psychiatrists insist on the transfer, the prosecutor and the judge completely ignore the doctor's conclusions. Pryanishnikov believes that the Russian authorities are actually afraid of the ritual that the shaman might perform. I was trying to explain it to myself. Well, I think they must have been scared of the rallies that were taking place as he was making his way through the east of Russia. But no, then all their further action showed me, in general, the situation in the country told me that no, it wasn't that. They were scared. Look, Navalny was also a media personality. He had large-scale support, a big audience, all that. This is a problem that the Russian authorities have been able to deal with for a long time. That is, they know how to deal with it. But here, they're afraid of his supernatural abilities and this fascination, especially during Sergei Shoigu's tenure in the Ministry of Defense. Fascination with these shamanic rituals for the success of the army. This Dapchun Karol, who calls himself the Supreme Shaman of Russia, and I know for a fact that it's Karol, who is against Gabyshev being free.
I am Olga Suvorova from Krasnoyarsk. Behind my back is the entrance of the Krasnoyarsk Psychiatric Hospital, where I spent more than 20 days by court order. I believe it was an act of punitive psychiatry.
In all court cases in Russia, a person must undergo a psychological and psychiatric examination before they can be found to be insane. However, in political cases, psychiatrists often employ vague and sometimes absurd formulations in their conclusions. Instead of providing medical diagnoses, they may label the accused's political views as a delusional disorder. That's the conclusion doctors came to, based on the results of an outpatient psychiatric evaluation of Krasnoyarsk human rights activist Olga Suvorova.
They believe I have a personality disorder because I have been active since my school years. I apologize for the repetition, but that's what it says. I have also taken an active civic role in the life of the city and the region, which is not typical for the average person. This is why they think I have a personality disorder.
She was detained on the 16th of May, right in the doctor's office, and taken for a forensic psychiatric examination in a mental institution. Coincidentally, this happened 2 days before the establishment of the Krasnoyarsk branch of Yekaterina Donsova's party, Rassvet, or Dawn, which Suvorova was supposed to head.
I landed at the airport in Krasnoyarsk. I told them my name. I flew from a meeting with Yekaterina Donsova, and I was met by police officers in plain clothes. and not in plain clothes.
In November 2023, journalist and former Rzhev City Duma member Yekaterina Dontsova announced plans to run for president of Russia. She campaigned for an end to the Russian-Ukrainian war, for democratic reforms, the release of political prisoners, particularly Alexei Navalny, and the restoration of relations with the outside world. Dontsova's campaign was accompanied by pressure from security forces and slander from pro-Kremlin media. As a result, in January 2024, she was denied registration for the elections. Dontsova then announced the creation of Rassvet.
On the one hand, it's funny, but on the other hand, it's scary. What if we institutionalize any socially active person to check whether he or she is normal?
Doctors have also deemed the actions of Ingvar Garlamov, a former volunteer at Navalny's headquarters and an advocate for the rights of orphans from Novokuznetsk, the result of a mental disorder. Putin's regime broke its teeth on me anyway. I want his jaw to fall off too. This is one of those medical reports that you can laugh at. That's 85% of that report. Instead of coming to medical conclusions, they're issuing political statements. And what's more, it was written that he planned more and more protests year after year. Navalny was mentioned again, as always. And this, apparently, led him to some delusional ideas, some ideas of reformism, and so on. They're very fond of that, by the way. Gorlanov began his path as an activist from the age of 18 when the authorities denied him housing and the apartment he was entitled to as an orphan. Gorlanov then began taking to the streets, picketing and pitching tents outside the Novokuznetsk city hall and waiting for Mayor Sergei Kuznetsov. Eventually, he managed to convince the authorities to give him an apartment. That, however, took several years. Gorlanov has been in a Novokuznetsk psychiatric hospital since February of this year. This is his second hospitalization for political reasons. He was first placed in a mental hospital back in December 2019. Before that, Gorlanov had come out to the building of the presidential administration in Moscow, picketing in support of political prisoners. And there he was detained by police officers who had eyeballed him and come to the conclusion that he had come from Novokuznetsk with some kind of appeal to the president. He must be some sort of fool, they thought. The doctors decided that Gorlanov was a danger to himself and others, and kept him in a hospital for a month. After that, police officers began calling the psychiatric hospital's orderlies on a regular basis when he was detained at street rallies in Novokuznetsk. And that's how this flywheel of psychiatry was launched against him. If you're sent to a psychiatric hospital once, then that reasoning starts to mean something to the authorities. That means you'll end up there more than once. Gorlanov is actively treated with psychotropic drugs, which he himself confirms. And, according to his lawyer, after being placed in a mental hospital, the activist started having memory lapses. During his last detention in February, Gorlanov was also involuntarily hospitalized in the Novokuznetsk Psychiatric Hospital for 6 months. While he was at the hospital, the court also ordered him to undergo compulsory treatment in criminal cases for inciting hate and insulting a police officer. If a person is placed in compulsory treatment by court order, they can only get out of the mental hospital after a formal reevaluation. These are conducted every 6 months in the mental hospital. They can also be requested on the initiative of the defense, the patient personally, or through an appeal against a court order. In all cases, the chances of success are very slim. In our cases, in both Garlanov's and Shaman Gabushev's cases, our request for a second psychological and psychiatric examination has never been granted, even though we ask for it every time. Priyanishnikov believes that doctors are again being pressured by the authorities in the case. They whisper in the ear of the psychiatrist or the chief doctor, who was grabbed by the FSB for stealing some paint when he was repairing the hospital. They have their hooks in him and say, "This is what you'll do. Do you like this?" He says, "Yes, sir." He calls over one of the doctors. The doctor says, "Sure, it's fine. That's what we're going to do." And that's it. That's where their subjective findings put the man away for a long time. Another way to put pressure on a political activist in a mental hospital is to prohibit him from communicating with his defense lawyers, or even sending complaints to government agencies and courts. Doctors often restrict their patients' communication. That is, sometimes they forbid visits, sometimes they forbid calls. Further, one has the right to appeal the court's decision. The doctors act contrary to the established duties in the law on psychiatric care, which provide for a person to correspond with state bodies, with the courts, in particular, with the prosecutor's office. This is directly stated in the law on psychiatric care. This is not some kind of speculation or conjecture on my part. They denied him the right, contrary to these rules. Gorlanov says doctors are also trying to turn him against his lawyers. When I interact with my defenders, with my lawyers, the head of the department, Dr. Olga Arkadievna, she's a bit aggressive about the fact that I do everything through my attorneys. That is, she tries to convince me that I should not trust my lawyers, my own defenders, that they're not really helping me, that they're just trying to get publicity. Appeals have also been unsuccessful in the case of Shaman Gabyshev. His defense team continues to demand his transfer to a general hospital in his native Yakutsk. Moreover, the transfer will be in Ussurisk, to Yakutsk from Ussurisk, because there's a general type hospital in Yakutsk, and he'll go back to where he's registered. That'll be much easier. He has a sister there and friends. They can give him packages and parcels, things like that. In general, one's own land, the feeling of being in one's homeland. These swings, they certainly unbalance a person, don't they? But he's adapted to it, and, in fact, constantly supports us. He says it's nothing, that it'll work out next time. Forcing a political activist to undergo psychiatric treatment is increasingly reminiscent of Soviet practices of punitive psychiatry, says the lawyer. All of this has returned. It's not super widespread yet, but it's becoming very noticeable. That is, before these two cases, things had been stable, roughly speaking, for several years. Then, since 2022 or 2023, this flywheel has been gradually unwinding, and is now gaining momentum, rapidly. Why do they resort to this? It's convenient, and it's fast. That's all it is.